Hey friends, hey friends, hey. So this video I already uploaded on my documentary channel, and you guys probably have already seen it if you're subscribed to my documentary channel. But if you missed it, you can watch it here again. But I wanted to upload it here on my Mental Gems channel because I can be a little bit more open about my personal spiritual beliefs. On the documentary channel, I try to keep it as neutral as possible. But because I am starting a series on this channel that delves deeper into psychology, the history behind it. We're really going to dive into that. Something that our Father has placed in my heart to do and shaken me very much so spiritually to do a deep dive on all things psychology, because on this channel a lot of times I have promoted a lot of things that I just didn't know. I wasn't aware, I wasn't proud, I was blind, I was pushing for you guys to do a lot of things. And with knowledge and wisdom, I believe that the Father allowed me to be in such error and make such mistakes because He wanted me to, when I am corrected with the new knowledge, to now spread that wisdom to others so that they could come out of darkness too. Okay, so this video is going to talk about Carl Jung. It's going to talk about Sigmund Freud, the connection between Hollywood, etc. If you already watch it, just let it play in the background because YouTube has been, YouTubing lately with me. So just let it play in the background. Our next video that will be in this series on this channel will be on alchemy, the history of alchemy. That one you don't want to miss. But we're going to tackle a lot, and you guys are going to be so surprised when I tell you everything is spiritual. Everything is spiritual, but this is a very intense educational video. I hope you guys enjoy, and if you support, please thumbs up, share. Okay, I love you guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Pen is mightier than the sword, and we write what whoever pays us most.
This episode is about Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays. Bernays is almost completely unknown today, but his influence on the 20th century was nearly as great as his uncle's. Bernays was the first person to take Freud's ideas about human beings and use them to manipulate the masses. He showed American corporations for the first time how they could make people want things they didn't need by linking mass-produced goods to their unconscious desires. Out of this would come a new political idea of how to control the masses.
His ideas were also influencing the very people who made it their job to control the masses.
I recognized that ideas could be as important weapons as anything. I would direct the conduct of people so that they could win through ideas their public goals. I called what we did publicity direction, whether it was to become an elected official or whether to become the head of a corporation or whether to sell ideas or a product.
So you taught the first course in public relations and wrote the first
book.
Textbook in public relations.
In a democratic society, the consent of the public is basic to anyone's meeting his or her social goals.
Do you also believe that the consent of the public is basic for corporate goals too?
Ideas were weapons and were even more effective than bullets.
Hey friends, this video is inspired by my Marilyn Monroe video. If you have not seen that, I will have it pinned in the comment section so you can go check that out, because we talked about Sigmund Freud in there and psychoanalysis and how it is used in cinema, and I wanted to go deeper into that. This is going to be a very intense but very educational video. I want you guys to follow along. I want to give you guys brief history and background of psychology from the ancient of days, where it came from, and then we're going to get into the two most influential psychologists that influence Hollywood today, psychology today. Like I said, it's going to be very intense. Every video clip and information and resource that is used in this video, you can find in the description box. If you want to see the full-length documentaries that are shared on this video, they're all labeled in the description box. But I do want to say that these videos and my whole Dark Hollywood series, I have a playlist for that, which I'll pin in the comments as well, tend to have a lot of fight behind the scenes, but I'm always willing to fight to get the message out. So support how you can. Make sure you thumbs up. Make sure you leave a comment, even if you have nothing to say, leave a heart, share with a friend, because there's most likely that this video will be demonetized. And also towards the end of this video, I will show you how you can support this channel so that I can put out more videos like this in the future without having to worry about censorship, demonetization, etc. if you want to support. But it really, really helps because this takes a lot of time, a lot of research, and a lot of risk. Trust me, it's very risky business, okay? But let's get into it. Today, we're specifically focusing on Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. But before we get into that, let's go back into the history of psychology. So the long history of psychology and humanity's curiosity about the mind started in ancient Babylon in 2000 to 500 BCE, the earliest psychological observations. The Babylonians are among the first civilizations where we see an organized attempt to understand human behavior. Their approach combined medicine, rituals, observation, and divination. They recorded symptoms of mental distress, such as anxiety, nightmares, depression, seizures, and hallucinations. Mental disturbances were often attributed to supernatural forces, like gods, demons, or curses. Treatments included rituals, prayers, incantations, but also practical medical remedies like herbs, baths, and diet. Babylonian dream books like the Iskar Zakiku, and forgive me for any mispronunciation, this is an ancient tongue, show that they believed dreams revealed inner mental states, anxieties, desires, or divine messages. And this is where Sigmund Freud found a lot of his inspiration from, if you saw my Marilyn Monroe video, which again, I highly, highly recommend you go watch that. Even though they didn't have psychology in the modern sense, they recognized that the mind influenced behavior and tried to understand it systematically. Now, Egypt, India, and China does have some parallel early theories of the mind as well. In ancient Egypt, Egyptians documented memory disorders, depression, like states, hysteria, and emotional disturbances. The heart, not the brain, was considered the center of thought and emotion. Healing combined medicine, ritual, what we would now call cognitive reframing, often involving symbolic meaning. So ancient India, Vedic and Ayurvedic traditions, texts like the Upanishads and Ayurveda explored consciousness, self-emotion, and cognition. Ayurveda recognized different mental constitutions, doshas, and emotional imbalances. Meditation and breathwork were early psychological therapies aimed at calming and training the mind. Now, in ancient China, Confucianism and Taoism both explored human nature, personality, ethics, and emotional balance. Traditional Chinese medicines connected emotional states to organ systems like anger to the liver, grief to the lungs, etc. They emphasize behavioral regulations, social harmony, and inner equilibrium, psychology embedded in philosophy. Now, in ancient Greece, the birthplace of scientific psychology, the Greeks shifted from supernatural explanations to natural and rational theories. Hippocrates proposed that moods came from bodily humors, marking the first biological theory of mental health. Plato believed in a divided psyche, reason, spirit, appetite. Aristotle wrote Anima on the soul, one of the earliest systematic works on memory, perception, personality, and cognition. The Stoics introduced cognitive theories, emotions result from beliefs, an idea that later influenced modern cognitive behavioral therapy. Greek thought is the bridge between ancient mystical views and modern scientific psychology.
Ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Chinese, developed sophisticated systems of thought about the human soul and its workings. Our ancestors may not have had fancy labs or brain scanners, but they were keen observers of human behavior. They explored the inner world through myths, rituals, and philosophical reflections. The Egyptians, for instance, believed that the heart held the key to the mind. These early explorations, though often intertwined with religion and superstition, laid the groundwork for the formal study of psychology. They linked mental states to physical health and spiritual well-being. Imagine trying to explain consciousness to a pharaoh. Fast forward to ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and some really stylish togas. It's here that psychology began to emerge. Then there's Hippocrates, the father of medicine. He proposed personality was influenced by 4 bodily humors. Enter Aristotle, who believed the mind and body were linked. He saw the mind as a blank slate or tabula rasa. Centuries, psychology remained largely intertwined with philosophy. Thinkers debated the nature of consciousness and the mind-body problem. Then came the 19th century, and the landscape of psychology began to change dramatically. Physiologists were making groundbreaking discoveries about the brain and nervous system. The stage was set for psychology to emerge as a distinct and scientific discipline. Psychology was breaking free from its philosophical roots and embracing the scientific method. In 1879, Wilhelm Wundt, often hailed as the father of experimental psychology, established the first formal laboratory dedicated to psychological research in Leipzig, Germany. Love him or hate him, Freud shook things up. He's the guy your friend brings up after 3 glasses of wine. Freud developed psychoanalysis, emphasizing unconscious conflicts and repressed memories. Jung explored the collective unconscious, archetypes, and introversion and extroversion. The behaviorists, led by figures like John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner, argued that psychology should focus on observable behavior, not on subjective mental states. Skinner, with his experiments on rats and pigeons, became synonymous with operant conditioning. He showed how behavior could be modified through reinforcement and punishment. By the mid-20th century, the pendulum of psychological thought was ready for another swing. Enter the humanists, a group of psychologists who emphasize the positive aspects of human experience, personal growth, and self-actualization. The cognitive revolution, which gained momentum in the 1950s and 1960s, shifted the focus back to the mind. Cognitive psychologists, drawing inspiration from computer science and artificial intelligence, viewed the mind as an information processor. We have evolutionary psychologists exploring how our evolutionary past shapes our present behavior. Why do we crave sugary foods? Why are we afraid of snakes? Blame it on evolution. Future of psychology, unraveling the mysteries of the mind. With advances in neuroscience, genetics, and artificial intelligence, we're poised to unlock the secrets of the brain and gain a deeper understanding of consciousness, creativity, and the nature of the self.
How does astrology and psychology, how did they become intertwined, right? Astrology and psychology have been connected for thousands of years because early civilizations believed the cosmos influenced temperament and personality. Babylonian zodiac signs were originally used to predict earthly events and individual destinies. The Greeks, especially the Hellenistic world, blended astronomy, medicine, and personality theory, linking planetary positions to temperament. Medieval and Renaissance physicians took astrological charts into account when diagnosing emotional and physical illness. Even in the 20th century, Carl Jung, one of psychology's founders, used astrology to explore archetypes, symbols, and personality patterns. Jungian psychology and astrology share the idea of a symbolic inner world. Astrology functioned historically as an early form of personality psychology, offering framework for why people behave differently. Civilizations that prioritized understanding the human psyche, like was stated, ancient Greece invented early psychological theories of motivation, cognition, and emotion. Ancient India developed sophisticated theories of consciousness, meditation, and self-regulation. Ancient China focused on emotional balance, moral psychology, and behavioral regulation. And the Islamic Golden Age from 8th to 13th centuries, scholars like Avicenna wrote about mental disorders, dream interpretations, neurology, and therapeutic techniques. Hospitals in the Islamic world had specialized wards for mental health. And then there's medical in Renaissance Europe. They blended astrology, theology, and early medical theories of the mind. This period preserved and expanded on Greek and Arabic psychological knowledge. And the Enlightenment in early modern Europe. Philosophers like Descartes, Locke, and Hume made major contributions to theories of perception, consciousness, and memory. The modern era, which the 19th century and onward to present, psychology became a scientific discipline. Wundt opened the first psychology lab in 1879. Freud explored unconscious processes. Pavlov, Watson, Skinner studied learning and behavior. Piaget researched cognitive development. Jung, Adler, Roger, Maslow expanded personality and humanistic theories. Humanity's enduring curiosity about the mind. Across thousands of years, humans have always wanted to know, why do we behave the way we do? Why do we dream? What causes fear, sadness, or love? How can we change our thoughts? What makes each person unique? Every civilization has contributed. Psychology didn't suddenly appear. It evolved from thousands of years of observation, philosophy, medicine, spirituality, and cosmology. Astrology and psychology. Let's get into a deeper dive through civilization. For most of human history, astrology and psychology were not separate. Both were attempts to understand why people behave differently, what motivates human actions, how fate, personality, emotion, and inner life operate, how cosmic or environmental forces shape the psyche. Ancient peoples assumed that the human mind mirrored the cosmos, as above, so below. As above, so below. You probably have heard about this statement before. Because the heavens were orderly and predictable, they believed human behavior could also be understood through patterns, the earliest idea of personality typology. So, 1. Ancient Mesopotamia, Babylonians and Assyrians. In this era was 2000 to 500 BCE. And the significance, this was the birthplace of both astrology and early psychological observations, right? So the Babylonians were the inventors of psychology and the zodiac and all things mystical. Babylonians invented the zodiac around the 5th century BCE. Their astrology was omen-based. The sky reflected events on Earth, including human moods and destinies. Each planet represented a god, and each god had personality traits, desires, and emotional signatures. The Babylonians recognized nightmares, anxiety, depression, seizure disorders, spirit possession, their version of disassociation or psychosis. Dream books like the Iskar Zakiku interpreted dreams as expressions of inner fears or divine messages, an early form of psychoanalysis. So this is, again, where Sigmund Freud found a lot of his influence. Astrology plus psychology connection, the planetary positions were believed to explain personality and emotional tendencies. So personality quiz and psychology all come from the zodiac, right? Psychological distress was often interpreted as misalignment with cosmic or divine forces. Babylon essentially pioneered the idea that personality is patterned, the foundation of later astrological psychology, and that is a real study, astrological psychology. Now, as far as the ancient Egyptians, this era was 3000 to 300 BC. Egyptians didn't use astrology exactly like the Babylonians, but they believed the decans, 36 star groups, influenced personality, health, and fate. Later Greek Egyptians, city Alexandria, became a center for Hellenistic astrology. Now, Egyptians believed the heart was a center of thought, emotion, memory, and morality. The brain was not important. It was removed during mummification, right? Emotions and mental imbalance could be caused by spiritual or social disharmony. Each decan had a deity with a personality. The deity's temperaments influenced the psychological traits of people born under them. So each star had its own deities, and whatever star you were born under, you would inherit the trait of that deity. Dreams were considered portals to the gods and reflections of inner conflict. Egypt anticipated the Jungian head of archetypes long before Jung. So Carl Jung was basically influenced from Egyptians, while Freud was influenced from the Babylonians. So the archetypes and all of those and more mystic spiritual dreams being a connection to the god, etc., came from Jung. So then you have ancient India, Vedic civilization, and this was 1500 BCE and to the present. The astrology, or known as Jyotisha, Indian astrology is one of the oldest continuous systems, uses lunar mansions to describe temperament. Planets, grahas, are psychological forces, desires, discipline, anger, creativity. Karma links cosmic events with inner states and behavioral tendencies. So Vedic and Ayurvedic text describes the three gunas, sattva, clarity, rajas, drive, tamas, inertia, which act like personality foundations. Doshas also shape emotional tendencies. Meditation, breath work, and self-observation were psychological training techniques thousands of years before modern therapy. Jyotisha is essentially a psychological system. Charts are interpreted to understand emotional patterns, fears, attachment, impulses, life purpose. Karma creates a feedback loop between mind, behavior, and cosmic rhythm. India produced the world's most explicitly psychological astrology. Now, in ancient China, 2000 BCE to present, Chinese astrology is based on 12 animals, personality archetypes. The elements wood, fire, earth, metal, water, cycles, yin, yang, seasons, cosmological patterns. These function like psychological typologies. Chinese thought emphasis, emotional balance for mental health, behavior regulation, harmony between inner life and outer society, moods and behaviors connected to organ systems like anger to liver, fear to kidneys. And then as far as the Chinese connection between astrology and psychology, the entire Chinese cosmological system is built on the idea that environmental and cosmic cycles shape temperament, motivation, emotional rhythms. Your birth year's animal and element express innate psychological tendencies. Classical Greece, now let's move on to them, which is the Hellenistic era, especially the era between 500 BCE to 300 CE. Greek astrology, heavily influenced by Babylon, is the direct ancestor of Western astrology. Zodiacs, planetary rulerships, houses, aspects, all developed more scientifically in Alexandria. Greek thinkers produced early scientific psychology. Hippocrates, humors shape temperament. Plato, reason, spirit, appetite. Aristotle, memory, cognition, motivation. The Stoics, emotions arise from beliefs. Now, Greek astrologers linked horoscope features with personality traits, emotional tendencies, decision-making styles, motivational patterns. The Greeks created the first systemic psychological astrology, predicting personality based on planetary configurations, a direct ancestor of modern astropsychology. Islamic scholars preserve Greek, Babylonian, Indian, and Persian astrological texts. Astrology and psychology connections. Islamic scholars believed planetary influences affected temperament and humoral balance, especially at birth. Astrological charts could reveal predispositions to certain illnesses, fears, and emotional patterns. Their work bridged mystical and medical psychology. Medieval and Renaissance Europe, astrology was central to medicine. Nearly every physician used charts. Astrologers analyzed the planets they aligned to these psychological states. So Saturn represented melancholy or sadness. Mars represented anger, aggression. Moon represented emotionality. Venus represented affection and sensuality. This was the precursor to modern personality, psychology, and archetypal psychology. Now, in the modern era, astrology fades scientifically but survives symbolically. By the 8th to 19th centuries, astrology was no longer seen as a science, but its psychological dimensions stayed alive. Psychology rises as a science. Wundt established experimental psychology. Freud developed the unconscious mind. Jung introduced archetypes, symbols, dreams, and explored astrology directly. Now, there's a channel on here that really breaks all of this down really well as well. The link between astrology, which I will have the video also in the description, called Eternalize. That's really, really great, phenomenal in breaking all of this down together.
Over time, most if not all ancient civilizations searched for meaning in the skies and personified their myths in the constellations. The Sumerians were among the first to observe and record the movements of celestial bodies, laying the groundwork for the study of astrology, literally the study of the stars. This helped the Babylonians in Mesopotamia to create the first organized system of astrology at around 2000 BC. Astrology studies the correlation between the movements of celestial objects and earthly events or human experience. The skies were thought to present celestial portents or omens. The Babylonians would use these to predict future events and take action to avoid disaster. This is known as mundane astrology. The Egyptians developed their own astrology based on the decans, which are 36 groups of fixed stars or small constellations divided into 10 degrees each. Each of the decans would be associated with a divinity. After the Alexandrian conquest in the 4th century BC, Hellenistic astrology was mixed with Egyptian astrology and Babylonian astrology, creating natal astrology. The emphasis moved from predicting mundane events to focusing on the positions of celestial bodies at the time of a person's birth, in order to provide insights into their personality and life path. The ancient stargazers observed how some stars remained fixed and others wandered. Though we now know that stars are not fixed, but rather move very slowly, the ancients imagined the planets as gods wandering amongst the constellations along the zodiacal route. Hence, planets were named after the gods. Today, our planets are named after the Roman gods. The figures of the zodiac are not just random and haphazard drawings, but images of the collective unconscious projected into the skies. For the astrologer, the natal chart is not just a portrait of the heavens at the moment of one's birth, but also a snapshot of our soul's plan. The well-known Hermetic dictum, as above, so below, is key to astrology. It is the idea that man, the microcosm, is influenced by the universe. For the 16th century Swiss physician Paracelsus, astrology was a source of critical knowledge for the physician. The myth of astrology was, and still is, another way of comprehending the world around us. The very nature of astrology connects it with the cosmos, myths, and the gods. Throughout most of its history, astrology was mainstream and considered a scholarly tradition. Western astrology was not only frowned upon by science, but also by religion, which considered it heretical, mainly because of its emphasis on fate rather than free will. It was the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung who inspired astrologers to return to the symbolic, to amplify the starry heavens with myths, and remember the planetary gods. Jung recognized some major archetypes, such as the wise old man, the great mother, the shadow, the hero, the fool, etc., that ancient astrologers could recognize from their planetary pantheon and zodiac signs. Jung was primarily interested in the way astrology could help to explore the psyche. The zodiac wheel symbolizes an imaginative journey, which is an early depiction of the individuation process. The Egyptians believed that at sunset, the sun god Ra would travel to the underworld, and at sunrise he would emerge again, having defended himself against the monsters of the underworld. The way of the individual is symbolized by the sun's path through the 12 zodiac signs. Individuation is not a linear process, but rather a process of circumambulation of the self. Just like Jung's theory of psychological types, astrology can also give a more or less total picture of the individual's character. Jung's recognition of the reality of the unconscious and his work with primordial images or archetypes was a great boon to astrology, which branched into a new field known as psychological astrology or astropsychology. Jung writes, "Obviously astrology has much to offer psychology, but what the latter can offer its elder sister is less evident. It would seem to me advantageous for astrology to take the existence of psychology into account, above all the psychology of the personality and of the unconscious. In this vision, astrology and alchemy, the two classical functionaries of the psychology of the collective unconscious, join hands." While the ancient astrologers thought of the 7 planets as gods, the Gnostics, an early Christian sect, thought of them as archons or rulers who prevent souls from leaving the material realm. They are the rulers of darkness, demonic powers under the command of the demiurge, the creator of the material universe. Jung and a group of researchers at the C.E. Jung Institute in Zurich had begun experiments using intuitive methods such as the I Ching, geomancy, tarot cards, numerology, and astrology. These intuitive methods give one access to what Jung calls the spirit of the depths, which from time immemorial and for all future possesses a greater power than the spirit of the times. Later in life, is believed not only by his constant references to astrology in his works and letters, or by his recommendation that all psychotherapists should learn astrology, for there are borderline cases where it is very valuable. Even in an interview shortly before his death, to mark his upcoming 85th birthday, Jung mentions the coming age of Aquarius. Any discussion of astrology leads, sooner or later, to the question of how to understand fate and free will. His motto is, "Man, know thyself."
Now, the key takeaway, psychology and astrology is evolved together. That's what I want you guys to get from this. For thousands of years, humans didn't separate mind and cosmos, personality and fate, inner life and outer patterns. Everything was spiritual. Everything was spiritually connected for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, all across the civilizations through generation and generations. Early civilizations created a system that explained behavior, predicted temperament, linked human psychology with cosmic or natural forces. Astrology was humanity's first personality theory, as you would say, and psychology. So all of these things are interconnected. That was a lot, but I wanted you guys to see where Freud and all of these scientists that in the future we're going to talk about and how they shape entertainment in Hollywood. Hollywood is really the biggest tool for the mind. But where did it start? Where did it have its origins and the spiritual implications behind these origins? And where did these people get their influence? So now that we know that, remember we said if you're paying attention, we'll quiz, because I know the intro is pretty boring getting all of those information and history out there. But real quick, quiz yourself, pause this video and answer questions in a comment. Who was Freud mostly influenced by? What civilization was he influenced by? Pause and answer. So the answer is, of course, Babylon. Freud was influenced by Babylon. But let's get a little bit into his background and biography, okay? He was born in 1856 in Czech Republic into a Jewish family. He was raised in Vienna, where he would spend most of his life, an intellectually gifted child, and he learned multiple languages early, and he excelled academically. He studied medicine at the University of Vienna, specialized in neurology, not psychology at first. Early research involved anatomy of the brain, nervous disorders, and physiology. His influences were Jean-Martin Charcot, introduced Freud to hypnosis and the idea that mental symptoms can have psychological, not physical causes. And towards the end of this video, we will get into hypnosis and how it is used in movies and shows, etc. And he was also influenced by Joseph Breuer, who co-developed the talking cure, which later became psychoanalysis. And he married Martha Bernays. They had 6 children together. His daughter, Anna Freud, later became a major psychoanalyst herself. And he fled Austria after the Nazi invasion in 1938 and moved to London. He died in 1939 after a long struggle with jaw cancer. Freud lived a life full of intellectual ambition, personal anxiety, and fierce commitment to exploring the human mind, even when his theories caused outrage.
Sigmund Freud grew up in a poor Jewish neighborhood in Vienna. As a boy, Sigmund was a brilliant, ambitious, and opinionated student. At 17, Freud graduated high school and entered the University of Vienna to study medicine. In 1882, Freud began an internship at the General Hospital in Vienna, and for the next 3 years, he experimented with a number of different specialties, including neurology. Freud redoubled his efforts at the hospital. He dreamt of making a discovery that would make him famous, wealthy, and benefit mankind. 1885, Freud's career took a momentous turn for the better. That year, his research in neurology led him to Paris to study the problem of hysteria. Hysteria had become a catch-all diagnosis for patients who exhibited an array of physical symptoms like spastic tics and speech impairments, with no known medical cause. Freud went to work with Joseph Breuer, a prominent Viennese physiologist who was also researching hysteria. In 1886, he opened his own practice, dedicated to treating hysteria and other nervous diseases. He experimented with a variety of techniques, including electrotherapy and hypnosis, but his results were disappointing.
We all speak Freud. Every time we turn around and say, oh, he's so anal, or that person is a control freak, or talk about Freudian slips.
He was an intellectual, he was an eccentric. At times he was an abuser of substances.
Sigmund Freud developed a revolutionary new way of thinking about the human mind. Freud believed that the unconscious is a place where we bury conflicts such as painful memories or unacceptable thoughts that we do not want to deal with.
Freud's major contribution to psychology, even people who disagree with Freud acknowledge he revolutionized the study of the mind. His key contributions were the unconscious mind. Freud argued that most mental life happens outside awareness. Repressed feelings, early memories, and instincts shape behavior invisibly. This idea changed everything. Before Freud, psychology focused mainly on conscious thought. So he went beyond and was talking about the subconscious, what we're not aware of. And this is where we talked about with Marilyn Monroe as well as subliminal messages. You can say he's kind of like the father of subliminal messaging in the industry. Okay. Now, to psychoanalysis. He created the first structured form of talk therapy, including free association, dream interpretation, analysis of slips, which is called the Freudian slip, transference, projecting emotions, and to the therapist. Psychoanalysis is the ancestor of almost every modern therapy. Psychosexual development. Okay. Freud proposed that personality develops through childhood stages centered on bodily zones, oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital. This was hugely controversial and still is because, man, he was really, really obsessed with sex, especially involving children. Okay. Now he created the Oedipus complex. Freud argued that young children experience unconscious attraction to the opposite sex, parent and rivalry within the same sex parent, meaning daughters wanted to lay with their fathers and sons wanted to lay with their mothers and wanted to take their fathers out of here, etc., vice versa, which is very disturbing because where do you get that from? Where do you get that from? So when he came out with that, a lot of his followers now were uncomfortable if their daughters kissed them on the cheek because they feel like, hey, my daughter wants to lay with me. And that came with a lot, right? That came with a lot. Use your imagination. How people justified during that time, sick men justified laying with their daughters, saying that she wanted it because Freud said so. So it was a dangerous mentality. Even many psychoanalysts found this extreme, and his peers found it extreme and very troublesome. Okay, so not everyone agreed with Freud during that era. But of course, Hollywood did, because, it's Hollywood. So then he also was the founder of id, ego, superego. Freud described the psyche as id, instinctual impulses, desires. Ego was the rational self, mediator, and the superego, internalized morality. This structural model became one of psychology's most enduring metaphors, right? So when you say someone has a big ego, then he also created the whole term defense mechanisms, right? And defense mechanisms such as repression, denial, projection, displacement, rationalization. So when you talk about defense mechanisms and use any of those terms, that's thanks to Freud. These are widely accepted today, even outside Freudian theory. Freud was always surrounded by controversy. His biggest lightning rods was, of course, the sexual basis of human behavior. Freud believed nearly all psychological issues stem from repressed or unresolved sexual impulses. Children are sexual beings in instinctual, not adult ways. Like, it's instincts for children to be sexual. Sexuality is the core of motivation. Many found this scandalous, dangerous, or absurd, but he thought sexuality moved everything. It is the reason behind everything that you do, which is why Hollywood uses this as well in commercials. It could be about a car and they make it sexual. It could be about eating ice cream or eating rice. No matter what the commercial is or what the advertisement is, marketing back in the days, especially the 1940s, 50s, etc., used a lot of the Freudian theology, you would say, by incorporating sex subliminals in it, because sex sells. Sex sells come from that Freudian thought process that mankind, women and men alike, are all motivated by sex. So if you put sex in everything, your sales will go up, your viewership will go up, everything will go up. Your music, your songs, everything will sell. So you can thank him for that. So, of course, the next controversial is the Oedipus complex. To me, that is the most controversial. And we had to learn all of these things in high school and college. Even many of his own students rejected this idea. Freud insisted this unconscious drama underlies human development, myth, art, and neurosis, right? Again, we talked about the Oedipus complex with children being attracted to their parents, which is just insanity.
As more and more of Freud's patients began recalling incidences of abuse from their childhood, Freud arrived at a bold conclusion. All hysteria was caused by sexual abuse during childhood, theorizing that unconscious sexual urges begin in infancy and drive much of human behavior. None of this sat well in Victorian Vienna.
There he was, this bearded Viennese doctor talking about sex all the time, encouraging promiscuity. He seemed to be just perfect for the 1920s.
So, dream interpretations. He believed all dreams expressed repressed wishes, often sexual. Critics said he overinterpreted symbolism, right? So, also, in my Marilyn Monroe video, we see how he took dream sequences and placed them into movies, right? So movies are played out. Well, he didn't do it, but Hollywood took the Freudian concept and used movies as dream sequences. So when you're watching a movie, they do it in a symbolic way like dreams. So nothing is in your face. Everything is subconscious, subliminal, and placed in a dream sequence form.
Sigmund Freud was inarguably one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. His pioneering of psychoanalysis would go on to influence many of the most important philosophers of the decades following, and would gradually seep its way into Western culture. Among those most influenced by Freud are the thinkers set on deconstructing the invisible underlying structures and driving forces of society, the underlying presuppositions, whether they be cultural, sociological, or even linguistic, the stories we tell ourselves or are told about the world we live in and how to think about it, the ideas and notions we take for granted. Both of these schools of thought would be major influences on the various counterculture movements that emerged in the 1960s, allowing for the empowerment of marginalized groups and ideologies. This desire to deconstruct follows naturally from Freud's lifelong interest in the underlying structures of the mind itself, these unseen narratives that drive our actions and beliefs. And although many of these thinkers were critical of some of the more dogmatic features of Freud's philosophy, there's no denying the fact that most of these schools of thought probably wouldn't have developed in the way they did without that original psychoanalytical seed planted by Freud at the turn of the century. In the 2002 documentary series The Century of the Self, Adam Curtis sets out to track the influence of Freud's ideas on those who seek to control the, quote, dangerous crowd in an age of mass democracy.
This episode is about Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays. Bernays is almost completely unknown today, but his influence on the 20th century was nearly as great as his uncle's. Bernays was the first person to take Freud's ideas about human beings and use them to manipulate the masses. He showed American corporations for the first time how they could make people want things they didn't need by linking mass-produced goods to their unconscious desires. Out of this would come a new political idea of how to control the masses.
His ideas were also influencing the very people who made it their job to control the masses. Needless to say that Freud's theories have permeated society in many ways. Testament to this is the fact that everyone watching this video has heard of the subconscious, the concept of repressed memories and Freudian slips, and many have probably heard of the Oedipal complex, or the id and the ego. Point being that Freud is a way bigger part of our everyday lives than we might at first realize. Freud's influence also extended to the arts. Notably, early on, the Surrealists who emerged in the 1920s and who found themselves delving deep into this new, unexplored territory that is the world of dreams and the unconscious, with a level of experimentation and abstraction which was heavily inspired by Freud's work on free association and dream analysis. And of course, over the years, Freud's ideas made their way to Hollywood as well. And I believe that these movies give us great insight into how the general public and artists alike were reacting to and coming to accept these ideas. Hitchcock's Spellbound is perhaps one of the first mainstream films to popularize the use of Freudian concepts and theories as narrative devices. Freud's basic idea when it comes to dreams is that they are manifestations of unconscious desires, fears, and various impulses. Dreams are essentially wish fulfillment, a place where all of these unconscious drives express themselves, as our defense mechanisms and conscious suppressors are dormant. But according to Freud, in our dreams, our subconscious comes to us in disguise, and it's the analyst's job to piece together the hidden meanings of this unconscious puzzle.
Here's where dreams come in. They tell you what you are trying to hide, but they tell it to you all mixed up like pieces of a puzzle that don't fit. The problem of the analyst is to examine this puzzle and put the pieces together in the right place and find out what the devil you are trying to say to yourself.
This is what we'll find repeated over and over throughout similar films of this period, as we can see in another Hitchcock film from 1964, Marnie, which is the last of what many consider to be Hitchcock's Freudian trilogy, also including his 1960 classic Psycho. I think this period in Hollywood's history is indicative of a culture coming to accept a relatively new and somewhat scary way of looking at the world and ourselves. This entire history is the story of psychoanalysis in general, and society's developing relationship with the human psyche and the acknowledgement of its importance. What Freud's ideas introduced to Western society were insightful, yet dangerous in many ways. Opening up an entire new dimension to explore, this new unexplored territory would fan the flames of many of Hollywood's greatest directors' creativity. Freud's ideas were popular with artists for the same reasons they gained popularity with the masses. They're easily understood and, well, easily marketable. For the artist, the rising popularity of psychoanalysis introduced an entirely new world of storytelling to be explored. It's impossible to overstate the impact that Freud and the rest of the psychoanalytical school of psychology had on Western culture and society as a whole, not just in art, but in business and academia. And I think that oftentimes there's no better way to track the public's relationship with an idea than to look at how it's represented in the media we consume.
The seduction theory controversy from Freud. Freud originally believed many female patients had been sexually taken advantage of as children. He later reinterpreted these accounts as fantasies rather than literal events. This reversal remains one of the most debated and ethically fraught decisions in the history of psychology. Okay, so he had this thing, if you came to sit with him, he automatically would say, oh, you were touched as a child. He wouldn't even try to really see that it could play any other possible, like anything that's wrong with you could be outside factors, environment, being bullied maybe, or anything else. Everything tied back to sex. This man was a deviant. He was a deviant. Yeah, his fixation on childhood was also very disturbing. Freud traced almost every adult psychological problems back to early childhood experiences and unconscious conflicts, and some found this reductive. His authoritarian teaching style was also a problem for the psychology community. Freud pressured followers to accept his theories or leave the movement. He was very much a dictator. If you didn't accept his theories, you gotta leave the movement because it's my way or the highway. This caused bitter splits with Jung, Adler, and others, and we're going to talk about Jung. Adler is for another video on my Mental Gems channel. Why was Freud so obsessed with sex? There's three main reasons. One, he believed sexual energy, libido, life, force. To Freud, libido wasn't just sex. It was vitality, creativity, desire, motivation. Sex was symbolic of all living energy. And then there was also the Victorian repression. Freud worked in Vienna during a time of intense sexual repression, strict morality, taboo around sexuality, especially female sexuality. He saw symptoms, hysteria, anxiety, bodily disorders that seemed to originate from suppressed desire. Personal experiences, Freud struggled with anxiety, phobias, obsession with his mother, guilt, sexuality with strict social norms. He had a strange obsession with his mother and fantasies. He himself wanted to sleep with his mother. So he projected that. You could say projection. He definitely did that, since that is something that came from him, but he projected it onto everyone else.
By writing down his dreams and free associating, Freud recalled events from his youth. He had discovered intense feelings of love for his mother, jealousy and hatred for his father, what he will later call the Oedipus complex. Freud concluded that dreams revealed sexual and aggressive wishes from childhood. He felt he had come upon a universal truth, the idea of infantile sexuality, that everyone was sexual from birth. Freud published 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, linking what he had named the psychosexual stages of development, oral, anal, phallic, and genital, to personality traits. The public was outraged by his use of sexual language in reference to children. He now believed that what his patients had described as sexual was really fantasy, the result of childhood wishes.
His ideas became really doctrine within psychoanalysis and then spread to psychology and to psychiatry in general, so that we see this even in the judicial system when a woman is talking about, or when a child is talking about having been. The first tendency is to believe that this may be nothing more than a fantasy, and ultimately that derives from Freud.
Freud applied psychoanalytic principles to religion, history, literature, and anthropology. His ideas were so powerful that many intellectuals were drawn to psychoanalysis as a way to understand larger social and philosophical questions, religion and morality. Carl Jung, one of Freud's most ardent admirers, claimed that Freud had overemphasized the importance of childhood sexuality. KarineAlourde, another analyst, would charge that Freud had grossly misunderstood female psychology, a charge that was echoed throughout the coming years. The press played a role in popularizing psychoanalysis, sometimes in a sensational way. By the 1930s, most Americans were at least familiar with Freud and his new psychology.
He also did a weird thing with his clients and patients. He would project that they had an attraction to him. So if an attractive woman would come in to work with him, he would project into them that they had an attraction to him and made them believe that they were attracted to him. His theories often reflected his own internal conflicts. So he projected his own internal biases and conflicts onto his theories and then spread them out as in that was general. Jung, Adler, and many other reputable psychologists did not agree with that, and they found problem with that, but he would just kick them out or silence them. Now, his history of psychoanalysis began as a radical idea that sickness could come from the mind, not the body. Early evolution, Freud and Breuer discovered that talking reduced hysteria symptoms. Freud developed free association, dream analysis, and transference. Psychoanalysis grew into a global movement with clinics in Europe and the US. His break with Jung and Adler, 2 of Freud's proteges, rejected key ideas. Jung disagreed with Freud's overemphasis on sexual drives. Adler criticized Freud for ignoring social forces. So Adler believed there were social forces around and even emotional forces that led to how we are. It's not all sexual, and we're not all sexually motivated. There are people that are not sexually motivated at all, that have no sexual desire for anything. But even Freud will tell you even that is sexual, because there's a reason why they have no sexual desire for anything. No one is just born like that. But I mean, there are exceptions to the rule. There are people that are just not like that. Psychoanalysis in Hollywood. That's the interesting part. The most unexpected chapter. During the 1930s to 1950s, psychoanalysis became trendy in Hollywood. Why Hollywood loved psychoanalysis? It felt glamorous, mysterious, intellectual. Movie stars were often emotionally troubled, anxious, or traumatized. Analysis gave them structure. Freud's idea about repression, dreams, and inner conflict felt cinematic. And y'all know Marilyn Monroe and Albert Einstein lived during the same decade. I know it's hard to believe that Marilyn Monroe lived during all of these psychologists that we're talking about. Like they overlapped. A lot of these stars, they overlapped. You know, it was not different generations years and years ago. During that time, a lot of these stars were starting to be troubled because you had these execs that had money and that had power that was sleeping with them, abusing them, causing them pain and trauma. And they wanted to be healed. They wanted to escape. They wanted to not think about it. And so you have these psychologists that are coming with these theories like psychoanalysis, and they have LSD and these substances to kind of help these stars escape. So it became very popular among the stars to really break down their trauma. Studios hired psychoanalysts to treat actors with anxiety and depression, addiction, etc., and to give advice on scripts, okay? Build complex characters, address personal conflicts on set. These analysts would come, they would help in the development of these complex characters that we can resonate with, and so the characters were no longer surface like the, film noirs and just people dancing around, but these characters became complex. We're now dissecting characters, like we could feel their emotions in their childhood, in their eyes. And it also helped with the subliminal messages, like we stated. And hey, if you want to invoke a sexy feeling, use the color red on a dress. Have her wear a red dress in a smoky room, and this will evoke this feeling. This is the type of music to play, etc. Because psychoanalysts were really, really good at that, especially with the Hays Code, to get around the Hays Code, because the Hays Code made it so you couldn't be vulgar on screen. So to get around that, they had to be really tricky with their subliminals. So therapy became almost a rite of passage in the golden age. If you were a who's who, you went into therapy. Why psychoanalysis was controversial in Hollywood? It encouraged stars to confront trauma. Studios feared anything that might provoke breakdowns, reveal scandals, disrupt filming schedules. So it started to become a problem because psychoanalysis was causing these stars to have breakdowns, because now, say they had a repressed memory and psychoanalysis bring it forward, now they're breaking down, they're crashing out, they're losing their minds, and then you have to give them substances because the brain is a protective layer. God, Yah makes no mistakes in how he makes us, okay? This is where I give my own spiritual belief in this video, but for the most part, I'm gonna be very unbiased. But he makes no accidents in how he creates us, and there is a creator, okay? And how he made the brain is that anything that traumatizes us, that hurts us, our brain knows how to shield us from that, suppress it, and helps us to move on and stay in the present and be okay. Now, therapy during those days and even today will unlock some of these memories and the words of healing, but it made these people worse because now something I repressed and I moved past, or I thought I healed from it. It's not that I repressed, but you know what? Your mind did whatever to make you survive, and you're chipper and you're okay, like a Marilyn Monroe, right? Yeah, I went through all of this as a foster kid, but still managed to function and never had any breakdown, wasn't on substances, was a normal human being. But the minute she started psychoanalysis, it unlocked these things in her, these repressed memories, and now it's like, oh, I thought I was healed, but no, this is resurfacing it and making me relive it. And then you have psychiatry, which started by the pharmaceutical companies, which Rockefeller, we all know, took over the pharmaceutical industry, and it was all monetary gain. Psychiatry now wants to prescribe you with these anxiety meds and these medications that are all monetary gain. So release the trauma so that we can medicate you and make more money. So the studio started peeping that, and it started to affect their bottom line. So they was like, and then these people too would want to reveal the scandals once the memory, maybe you were drugged at a party, executive party, and now you go to therapy, that memory comes out, and now you want to reveal that this director did this, and now it's becoming a problem, all because of therapy, okay? So analysts were seen as too powerful. Some stars were in therapy 5 days a week. Analysts became confidants, mentors, moral authorities, sometimes manipulators. And you had analysts who Like with Marilyn Monroe, who had her own analysts that took advantage for monetary gains, started feeling powerful that they have control or a voice of authority over the star that they're supposed to be helping, and they started to abuse that system. Studios suspected an analyst of interfering with contracts and shaping stars' decisions. It exposed Hollywood's dark side. Therapists heard addictions, affairs, abuse, exploitation, and family trauma. And these therapists, if they were good ones, were really invested in these stars and started to feel sorry and wanted to like really help them. So they encouraged these stars to speak out, write a tell-all book, etc. You know, the good ones. Like, no, don't just sit down laying down. Take your power back. So directors started to have an issue with that. This worried studio heads who valued secrecy. Psychoanalysis encouraged stars to rebel. Therapy helped actors assert boundaries, refuse roles, reject studio control, and demand better pay. Studios hated this. So there was a Cold War suspicion as well. Some accused psychoanalysis of being too European, too liberal, too connected with refugees from fascism. It was sometimes attacked as an un-American or subversive. So yeah, I can talk about the negatives of Freud and psychoanalysis, but I'm going to be unbiased and talk about the positives as well. The positives was that it started to create the culture in Hollywood of exposure, right? That's when you started having stars speak up and expose and not just take things lying down in the abuse. So there was a good side to it, although we will see there was a toxic bad side to it. But to be fair, the good side I'm here for, because now these stars were speaking up. Like they were like, no, I'm not going to keep taking this. So why Freud still matters today, even though many of his specific theories are outdated, Freud permanently transformed how we think about childhood, how we interpret dreams, how we understand repression, therapy itself, the connection between sexuality and identity, the influence of unconscious forces, the meaning of symbols, slips, anxiety, and desire. He made the psyche dramatic, narrative, and alive. Psychoanalysis in modern Hollywood and pop culture. Freud never left Hollywood. He simply changed costumes, right? The Golden Age used psychoanalysis behind studio doors. Today, it shows up on screen, online, and celebrity culture, and in the way people talk about themselves. Here's how Freud's legacy survives now. Celebrities openly discuss trauma, like we stated, childhood wounds, the unconscious, inner healing, shadow work, addiction recovery, repressed memories. This normalization began through Freudian influence. Method acting, Lee Strasberg, the Actors Studio, which Marilyn was a part of, and Dorothy Dandridge was also a part of. That's how they became friends, was in the Actors Studio. And they were deep into a lot in the Actors Studio, okay? Was directly inspired by psychoanalytic idea. So that's where all of these practices, LSD, that Marlon Brando was part of the Actors Studio also. It was like a secret club for the actors. The psychoanalytic ideas that they had in the Actors Studio was emotional memory, digging into past trauma, using repressed feelings, unconscious motivations. It is basically Freud turned into acting technique. Actors like Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Scarlett Johansson, even today, they still have these Freudian practices in the Actors Studio, okay? But Marilyn was one of the first main founders, her and Dorothy Dandridge. I did a video for Dorothy Dandridge as well. And they all rely on emotional excavation as craft. Celebrities framed as psychological case studies. Tabloids and social media analyze stars like she has childhood abandonment issues. This is how now you see tabloids today. And even ourselves, me as a content creator, if you do these documentaries, you don't even realize how Freudian ideology slips in. When we say, oh, she had childhood abandonment issues, even in the comments, right? Or he's projecting, or she's disassociating, or he's narcissistic. All of these terms, narcissism, etc., all Freudian, right? These are all everyday Freudian concepts. Modern public discourse treats celebrity behavior as psychological narratives. Pop culture's obsession with trauma as a theme in Euphoria, BoJack Horseman, Succession, Breaking Bad, The Bear, Joker, Black Swan, right? All directly draw from psychoanalytic frameworks of repression, childhood wounds, fixation, defense mechanisms. Freud would be thrilled, right? The erotic, the forbidden, and the subconscious. Music videos, fashion, and pop star branding regularly play with taboo, desire, repression, dream imagery, symbolic sexuality. This is where especially the genre of hip-hop over sexuality. Freud would be so happy. So think The Weeknd, psychosexual storytelling. Lana Del Rey, Freudian femme fatale myth-making. Beyonce's Lemonade, symbolic dream imagery and shadow work, right? Billie Eilish, the uncanny and trauma dreamscapes. Pop culture treats the psyche like a cinematic labyrinth. Freud's legacy and therapy-based storytelling shows like In Treatment, The Sopranos, The Patient, Good Will Hunting, A Dangerous Method, Donnie Darko, Therapist in Unconscious Imagery, all center around Freudian structures, transference, trauma excavation, dream symbolism, and repressed emotion. Freud's influence on film noir in 1940s and 1950s, was deeply explicitly Freudian. The genre emerged right when Freudian psychoanalysis became mainstream in America. Returning World War II soldiers faced trauma. Hollywood was fascinated with the unconscious. Freud became part of noir's visual and narrative vocabulary. The femme fatale as a Freudian death drive. The femme fatale is erotic, dangerous, forbidden, irresistible, self-destructive. Think of Gilda, right? She embodies Freud's eros, sexual energy. In Hollywood, Freud never died. Let's get into, I would say, the third part, which is Carl Jung. Carl Jung is one of the most fascinating, complex, and controversial figures in modern psychology. His work sits at the crossroads of science, mythology, spirituality, astrology, and the paranormal. He was born in 1875 in Switzerland. Father was a Protestant pastor. Jung grew up around deep religious discussions, which shaped his interest in spirituality and symbolism. Jung was introverted, imaginative, and often isolated as a child, traits that later influenced his theories of inner worlds. He was trained in medicine and specialized in psychiatry. He worked at the famous Golsey Psychiatric Hospital, where he gained a reputation for brilliant case studies and innovative techniques. As far as his relationship with Freud, Jung became Sigmund Freud's protege and was considered the heir to psychoanalysis. But Jung broke from Freud in 1913 due to Freud's insistence that sexuality is the foundation of the psyche. Jung's belief that the psyche is spiritual, symbolic, and collective. Jung's openness to mysticism and paranormal phenomena. Their break was dramatic and emotionally devastating for both men. As we said, Freud was a dictator, and Jung continued to write, lecture, and analyze patients until his death in 1961. His influence expanded beyond psychology into art, religion, anthropology, myth, and the humanities. So he lived during the era of Miss Marilyn Monroe, okay? All through the 40s and 50s of Hollywood, okay? Jung believed we inherit a layer of unconscious knowledge, symbolic, mythic, and shared across all humanity. The archetypes, universal patterns such as the shadow, the self, the hero, the mother, the trickster, the wise old man. These appear in myths, dreams, symbols, and religions. Introversions and extroversion. Jung was the first to develop this distinction, which later became the foundation of personality tests like the MBTI. Psychological types, 8 types based on thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition, introversion, and extroversion, a precursor to modern typologies. Jung's concept, synchronicity, was Jung's concept. Meaningful coincidences occur without casual connection, but with psychological significance. The lifelong process of becoming whole, integrating the conscious and unconscious. Jung and astrology, why he took it seriously. Jung considered astrology a symbolic psychology of antiquity, not a literal science, but a meaningful map of archetypes. Why Jung studied astrology, he saw astrological symbols as expression of archetypes in the collective unconscious. He used astrology in his clinical work, analyzing natal charts of patients to understand emotional patterns. He noticed synchronicities around birth charts, meaningful psychological themes matching astrological symbols, and astrology represents the sum of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. For Jung, astrology helped explain personality patterns, life phases, emotional tendencies, spiritual themes. It wasn't superstition to him, it was symbolic language. Jung openly documented paranormal experiences, both personal and during therapy sessions. These were not fringe ideas to him, they were central to his theories. He had some key paranormal experiences where tables cracked, knives flew, loud sounds occurred without cause. He claimed events often coincided with family emotional tension, implying a psychological connection.
One of Carl Jung's most well-known and controversial concept is the collective unconscious. Jung experienced exceedingly vivid dreams throughout his life. The first one starting at the age of 3, where he encountered the so-called man-eater, a giant cyclops sitting on a golden throne with a single eye gazing upwards, symbolizing a ritual phallus. Jung would think of this subterranean god, not to be named, as the underground counterpart and dark side of Lord Jesus. This haunted him for years, and was his initiation into the realm of darkness. Throughout his life, Jung studied Gnosticism, alchemy, comparative religion, and mythology to acquire a wider knowledge of the origins and significance of mankind's collective unconscious. Jung believes that the archetypes are the unconscious images of the instincts themselves. But how can we prove the existence of a collective unconscious? Jung tells us that the main source is dreams. Since early childhood, Carl Jung experienced paranormal phenomena, that is, phenomena that are beyond the scope of scientific understanding, such as dreams which foresaw the death of a certain person, clocks which stopped at the moment of death, glasses which shattered at the critical moment. Jung's personal experiences with the paranormal would set him on a quest to find an explanation of these events with his theory of analytical psychology, especially regarding extrasensory perception, or ESP, precognition, clairvoyance, telepathy, intuition, etc. His maternal grandfather, Reverend Samuel Preiswerk, who had learned Hebrew because he believed it was spoken in heaven, found himself continually surrounded by ghosts and would devote one day every week to conversing with the spirit of his deceased first wife, keeping a chair for her in his study, much to the dismay of his second wife, Augusta Preiswerk, Jung's maternal grandmother. Augusta was clairvoyant and a spirit seer. This gift is traced back to an event that she had at the age of 20, where she fell into a coma for 36 hours. She would sometimes see apparitions of persons unknown to her, but whose historical existence was later proved. Jung's mother, Emily Preiswerk, also experienced strange occurrences with sufficient regularity to write a diary exclusively dedicated to them. Her father, Samuel, insisted that she sit behind him when he was writing his sermons, as spirits were disturbing him. Emily spent much of the time in her own separate bedroom, enthralled by the spirits that she said visited her at night. Jung described his mother as having two personalities. At day she was a loving mother, but at night she seemed mysterious and terrified Jung, unlike Jung's father, who was more predictable. Both his mother and father were the 13th children of their families. Just like his mother and grandmother, Jung had also described himself as having a dual personality, which he called personality number 1, aimed at social integration, and personality number 2, which was ancient, deeply knowledgeable, and close to nature, to the night, to dreams, and to whatever God worked directly in him. Jung's own account presents these incidents as connected with seances, an attempt to communicate with spirits. The medium was his cousin, Helen Preiswerk, and his participants members of his own family. In addition, a number of spirits with which the medium was in communication with were none other than Jung's ancestors. When he was an undergraduate, Jung discussed the occult and the esoteric in a student club, known as the Sophingia Lectures, including the existence of the soul, the reality of spirits, psychokinesis, messages from the dead, hypnotism, clairvoyance, and precognitive dreams. Jung continued to attend seances and conducted a series of experiments with mediums, in which he witnessed materialization. He also witnessed levitation on several occasions. At one seance, 4 of the 5 people present saw an object like a small moon floating above the abdomen of the medium. Jung's observations at these seances formed the basis of his doctoral dissertation published in 1902, entitled On the Psychology and Pathology of So-Called Occult Phenomena. When Jung became a follower of Freud, he continued to study the paranormal. Freud rejected the subject and was dismissive. Later, however, Freud wrote in a letter to Jung, "In matters of occultism, I have grown humble. My hubris has been shattered. I've seen objects moving that were not directly touched, and moreover under absolutely satisfactory scientific conditions. One could describe these movements as levitation. If one assumes that the objects moved by themselves." Jung entered the period of his confrontation with the unconscious, where he would have visionary or altered states of consciousness and communicate with his inner figures. One of these figures was Philemon, a pagan with an Egypto-Hellenistic atmosphere and a Gnostic appearance, who represented superior insight, and communicated that there are things in the psyche which one does not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. Philemon had appeared in his dreams with kingfisher wings, and Jung, in order to understand the image better, did a painting of it. It was Einstein, who was Jung's guest on several occasions at dinner, who started him off thinking about a possible relativity of time as well as space. 1916, Jung felt compelled from within to formulate and express what might have been said by Philemon. This gave birth to the Septem Sermonis ad Mortuos, 7 Sermons of the Dead, a collection of 7 mystical or Gnostic texts, which Jung published under the pseudonym Basilides, an early Christian Gnostic teacher. It all began with a restlessness and an ominous atmosphere surrounded him. Then his house began to be haunted, and Jung's 12-year-old daughter, Agathe, who had inherited her grandmother's psychic abilities, would see ghosts. Jung writes, "Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, the front doorbell began ringing frantically. It was a bright summer day. Everyone immediately looked to see who was there, but there was no one inside. I was sitting near the doorbell and not only heard it, but saw it moving. We all simply stared at one another. The atmosphere was thick, believe me. Then I knew that something had to happen. The whole house was filled, as if there were a crowd present, crammed full of spirits. They were packed deep right up to the door, and the air was so thick it was scarcely possible to breathe. For God's sake, what in the world is this?" Then they cried out in chorus, "We have come back from Jerusalem, where we found not what we sought." During the first half of his career, Jung was not as interested in the question, do ghosts really exist, but rather, who is it that sees a ghost? Under what psychic conditions does one see it? What does a ghost signify when examined for its content as a symbol? To Jung, what mattered was the reality of the experience, and in this, he took his patients very seriously.
He had precognitive dreams. Jung had dreams that he later believed predicted real events. The most famous vision of tides of blood flooding Europe, which he dreamed before World War I began. He described seeing ghostly figures in his home as a child. He had some controversial beliefs, why the public and scientific community criticized him. Jung's ideas often clashed with mainstream science. His belief in the occult, his willingness to engage with astrology, alchemy, paranormal phenomena, and mysticism led many to dismiss him as unscientific. Scientists found this idea unverifiable. Freud disliked Jung's move away from sexuality towards mythology. His theory of meaningful coincidences was seen as mystical, not measurable, and academics disliked how symbolic, mythological, and non-material Jung's theories were. Jung believed myths expressed psychological truths, religious experiences came from the psyche, symbols and dreams revealed inner processes. Some considered this too spiritual for science, others too psychological for religion. His Red Book, published long after his death, this private journal contained dialogues with inner figures, mystical visions, and mandala drawings, far more esoteric than most expected from a major psychologist. Jung's work influences modern personality psychology, therapy, dream analysis, art, mythology studies, religious studies, film and literature, astrology and esoteric studies, self-development, and shadow work, the entire New Age movement. Jung is now recognized as a pioneer who explored the symbolic, mythical, unconscious, and spiritual dimensions of being human. So now, before we get into hypnosis, which is the darkest part of this video, this documentary that you're going to witness, let's talk about the church and Freud and oppositional relationship real quick, right? Because we know that the 1940s and 50s, if you see my Marilyn Monroe video, was a very puritanical era where America was heavily Christian, influenced by the church, and you can't negate that. So there was a lot of opposition around that time to Freud psychology entering into mainstream media, Jungian psychology entering into mainstream media as well. Freud was far more controversial within Christianity than Jung, though. He, as much as Jung was the more spiritual, esoteric one, speaking to spirits and stuff, believe it or not, Christians at least respected the fact that he believed in the spiritual world. And actually, Jung was a little bit more open biblically and tried to tie those things in. He was trying to mix, basically. I mean, you can't do that. You can't mix the two. But he was trying to mix, and earlier Christians had more respect. At least Jung had reverence for the spiritual understanding of Rome and didn't deny God. But Freud was atheist, and he thought it was all a joke. Spirituality didn't exist. God didn't exist. He was seen as a threat to Christian morality as well. Freud, right? Because Freudian psychoanalysis made you, release your sexual oppression. Any dreams you had was really who you are. And since there's no God, you don't have to repress who you really are. Show who you really are, which brought on a lot of morality issues because now people were more liberated. He basically started that liberation movement, hedonism, right? Enjoy life, live how you want to live because God is not real. So morality is not real. It's a construct. If you want to sleep with underage people, you can do that. He didn't directly say that, but you guys saw with his obsession with that. And in my Marilyn Monroe video, we talked about how Anton LaVey was part of this movement that was trying to lower the age of consent so that, people could freely sleep with young boys. This Freudian concept was intertwined with that. So Christians found that very problematic. Like the morality decline happened very quickly once Freud was introduced to Hollywood. And we can say that no matter if you believe in God or not, you can see the morality decline in the world today. And that's because Freud, and Christians had a big problem with that.
The late 1800s marked the end of the Victorian Age, a period of extreme puritanical restrictions. Any expression of human sexuality was considered an outrage. Personal matters were never discussed in polite society. Professional therapists didn't exist, and people with psychological problems had nowhere to go. It was in the midst of this, in 1886, Dr. Sigmund Freud began treating patients with a simple but radical approach. He listened. Freud's goal was to get his patients to talk as much as possible about anything and everything. In Freud's office, no subject was taboo. Freud was convinced that if his patients could bring their repressed thoughts to the surface through conversation, they would have to confront them.
He said the unconscious is the real us, buried down like the bottom of an iceberg. All we see is the tip of the iceberg above the surface of the oceans. We are driven by sexual desires, for example, that lay dormant but are trying to somehow affect our behavior.
At first, the mainstream medical community met Freud with scorn and derision. They labeled him a radical and revolutionary.
The Times certainly did not favor any unedited, unexpurgated discussion of sex.
In the early 1900s, a small number of like-minded men became interested in Freud's new science, psychoanalysis. As Freud's reputation grew, so did his circle of supporters. And in time, psychoanalytic societies sprang up in Vienna, Zurich, and New York. Soon, terms like ego, superego, the id, and the Freudian slip all became household words. Freud continued to provoke the mainstream. He developed new theories on everything from the components of the mind to childhood sexuality.
We are a society that talks very freely about our inner feelings, about our conflicts, about sex, sexuality. This is all part of the Freudian revolution. There's an openness in society today that can be traced directly back to some of the Freudian thought and theory and how things have shifted.
He was seen as a threat to traditional sexual ethics and the authority of scripture. Freud's atheism was a red line. Freud was openly atheist. He believed religion was an illusion, a psychological crutch, a childhood projection, a form of collective neurosis. He even wrote a book called The Future of an Illusion, where he compared God to a magnified father figure. For early Christians, this was not simply secular, it was hostile. The church viewed this as a direct attack on the existence of God, divine revelation, the legitimacy of faith, and he didn't think dreams was God talking to you. Christianity rejected Freud's sexual emphasis. Freud claimed childhood sexuality exists. Of course, Christianity was against that. Morality is partially repressed desire. Sexual drive shapes personality. Guilt is largely psychological, not spiritual. So when you're feeling guilt, when you feel guilt, it's not spiritual. It's not a calling to be moral or to be righteous, but it's more a psychological thing that was projected to you from your parents. Sin does not exist. Okay? So if you feel, you shouldn't feel guilt. Guilt is not real. It's psychological. So you could kill someone right now. You shouldn't feel guilt. Christian leaders saw this as immoral, obscene, corrupting, undermining virtue and family values. Many Catholic theologians called Freud's theories dangerous, perverse, anti-Christian. Because Freud replaced sin with psychological drives, the church felt he threatened Christian ethics. Freud's view on God, projection of the Father. Freud said, God is an exalted father, a projection of infantile needs, end quote. So if you grew up without a father figure, you're more prone to believe in a God in the sky, where now we see that as false, because people that tend to grow up without a father figure tend to reject a God in the sky because of the bitterness. They project their daddy issues onto the God of the sky, right? So that's quite the opposite. People are more likely to be open to Christianity and a father in the sky if they grew up with a father in real life. So he was wrong about that. This was incredibly offensive to the church. It reduced prayer, faith, and spirituality to psychological coping mechanisms. Theologians saw this as reductionist, dismissive, arrogant, deeply anti-religious. Freud saw religious ritual as obsessive neurosis. Freud compared religious rituals to compulsions, obsessive behavior, magical thinking. Early Christians saw this as pathologizing belief, insulting to liturgy, dangerous to spiritual formation. Christians feared psychoanalysis would replace the confessional. Catholic priests compared analysis to secular priests, offering confessions without God, offering healing without grace. And though me personally, I don't believe in confessing your sins to any man, don't throw stones at me, but you have a father, you confess to him, and that's that, our Father in heaven. But they felt like these therapists were replacing that, and it did come to a point where humans become codependent on these therapists, and it became a form of idolatry, because now you're not going to the Father for healing, you're going to these psychoanalysts who, depending on whatever they believe, they could literally manipulate your mind, as Freud would manipulate a lot of his female clients that he found attractive into believing that they were attracted to him, and then later taking advantage of them physically. So there were a lot of cases, and still are a lot of cases today, of psychoanalysts that take advantage of their clients and really infiltrate their brains to make them, insert thoughts in there. And so you don't know who you're confessing all of this to, being open to. Like, they're not all created equal, right? The church worried psychoanalysis undermined confession. Therapists replaced spiritual direction. Psychology became a new circular religion that replaced the Bible. This fear is still present today in some denominations. The church and Jung, a much more nuanced relationship, because a lot of Christian therapists or psychiatrists use Jung's theories a lot more than Freud, right? So they were a lot more open to Jung, although Jung, I don't know. They both were equal to me if you're Christian. Yeah. But while Freud was seen as an enemy, Jung was seen as mysterious, heretical, but intriguing. Many early Christians disliked Jung, but others were fascinated, much more fascinated, right? But here's why most Christians found Jung dangerous. Jung's view of God was psychological, not literal. Jung believed God is an archetype, just another archetype, a symbol of the self, an inner experience, not an external being. Like, you are God. You are your own God, right? This blurred the lines between spirituality and psychology, revelation and myth, doctrine and symbolism. He also believed you can be Satan. You can be both Satan and God. They're all just archetypes. Some theologians accuse Jung of relativism, pantheism, mysticism bordering on paganism, confusing myth with revelation. And then also, his interest in the occult was a problem as well. Jung studied alchemy, practiced active imagination, believed in synchronicity, wrote about spirits, visions, had paranormal experiences he took seriously. This alarmed Christians who associated this with occultism, spiritual danger, non-Christian mysticism. The church tended to distrust anything that blurred psychological and magical experience. Jung rejected Christian moral absolutism. Jung believed morality emerges from integrating the shadow. Evil is part of the psyche. Spiritual growth requires confronting darkness. Traditional Christians feared this sounded morally ambiguous, too tolerant of sin, psychologically relativistic.
Jung was very interested in understanding the astrological age ever since writing Ion, which is the name of a Hellenistic deity associated with cyclical time and the zodiac. Jung observes that the birth of Christ begins at the age of Pisces. The two fish swimming in opposite directions, the star of Bethlehem seen by the Magi, was the soul of Christ that descended upon the earth, beginning a new eon. This would place the birth of Christ under Pisces. Jung reckoned that we were in a paradigm of shifting ages, a time of change that he had been able to make sense of through astrology. Jung notes that the concepts of heaven and hell cannot remain separated forever. They will be united again, and the age of the fishes will soon be over. If the age of Pisces is ruled by the archetypal motif of the hostile brothers, Christ and Antichrist, then the approach of the next age, Aquarius, estimated to fall between AD 2000 and 2200, will constellate the union of opposites, bringing forth a concept of human totality. It will then become more difficult to separate good from evil, light from darkness, which will form part of a unity. The Christians call it the second coming, the emergence of the Son of God. Nietzsche calls it the Übermensch, who must go beyond good and evil. The mystic Swedenborg calls it the Maximus Homo, the universal human, who represents heaven in a human form. And others call it an age when man will awaken to his spiritual powers, whatever that might entail. Jung stated, Christianity has marked us deeply because it incarnates the symbols of the era so well. It goes wrong insofar as it believes itself to be the only truth, when what it is one of the great expressions of truth in our time. To deny it would be to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What comes next? Aquarius, the water pourer.
But here's why many Christians liked Jung. Surprisingly, Jung became influential among Christian thinkers, monks, and mystics. One, because Jung took spirituality seriously. Unlike Freud, Jung engaged with theology, respected Christian mythos, studied saints, mystics, and religious symbolism. Believed the divine is psychologically real. This appealed to Christians searching for a bridge between spirituality and psychology. So those, lukewarm Christians. Jung's archetypes match biblical symbolism. Jung's ideas help Christians reinterpret Adam and Eve, the Christian archetype, the apocalypse, angels, spiritual warfare, the soul's journey. Christian mystics especially resonated with the self archetype, individuation, the journey into the shadow. Christian therapists and pastors use Jungian ideas today, especially in pastoral counseling, spiritual direction, dream interpretation, inner healing ministries. He shaped modern Christian therapeutic models. Jung and Catholic mysticism overlapped. Jung admired Thomas Aquinas, Meister Eckhart, St. John of the Cross. These mystical traditions already explored inner symbols, God images, dark night of the soul, transformation through suffering. So clergy found common ground. The shadow is the repressed, denied, hidden, or unconscious part of the personality. It contains impulses we don't like, emotions we find unacceptable, desires we were ashamed for, anger, envy, fear, lust, rejected talents, unlived potential, wounds, and traumas, and also gold, creativity, authenticity, power. The shadow is morally neutral. It is not sin. It is simply the unconscious. The goal is not to beat the shadow, but to integrate it so the personality becomes whole. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the Christian doctrine of sin, a moral spiritual reality. The definition, sin is a moral and spiritual offense against God, rooted in disobedience, pride, self-centeredness, rebellion, ignorance, separation from divine will. Sin is not a psychological concept. It is ethical, spiritual, relational. Sin damages the soul, relationships, one's relationship with God. Goal, repentance, forgiveness, transformation through grace. How they overlap. Even though they come from different systems, they intersect in powerful ways. Both deal with the darkest parts of the self. The shadow, the unconscious dark, sin, the moral spiritual dark. Both explain why humans act against their own intentions. Paul in Romans 7 says, I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep doing. This is the shadow speaking through scripture. Both require self-examination. Jung, introspection, shadow work. Christianity, confession, examination of conscious humility. Both say denial leads to inner corruption. Jung, the shadow grows darker if ignored. Christianity, sin grows in darkness. Both warn that the mask, persona, can be spiritually dangerous. How do they differ? 1. Purpose. Shadow to become whole, sin to become holy. Source of transformation. Shadow, integration. Psychological work, sin, forgiveness, divine grace. Nature of darkness. Shadow, neutral, human, unconscious, sin, moral, willful, spiritual. Final aim. Jung, individuation, self-unity. Christianity, union with God. And then last, view of morality. Shadow, personal, symbolic. Sin, universal, absolute from God. Then there's Christian mysticism through a Jungian lens. Jung was obsessed with Christian mystics. St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Thomas Aquinas, Meister Eckhart, the Desert Fathers. He believed Christian mystics achieved what he called the individuation process centuries before modern psychology existed. St. John of the Cross he described as ego death, desolation, loss of spiritual certainty, inner dryness, painful purification. Jung saw this as an encounter with the shadow and the self. In Jungian terms, the ego dissolves, unconscious content rises, one faces inner wounds, the false self burns away. The mystics interpreted it spiritually. Jung interpreted it psychologically, but the experience is nearly identical. Jung believed Christian imagery expresses universal archetypes, like Christ represented the self, wholeness, unity, the divine within. Satan represented the shadow, the denied split of darkness. Mary represented the anima, feminine soul image. The Holy Spirit represented the voice of inner truth. The cross represented the tension of opposites, ego versus shadow, spirit versus matter. The resurrection represented psychological rebirth. The Trinity represented the structure of the psyche. He did not say Christianity wasn't real. He said Christianity expresses psychological truths in sacred forms. Christian mystics often experience visions, inner voices, symbols, dreams, ecstatic states. Jung believed these were encounters with the unconscious, the archetypes, the self. He developed active imagination as a structured version of mystical contemplation. Jung once wrote, "In the Christian mystics, I find the deepest psychology ever written," end quote. This is where Jung and Christianity part ways. Jung didn't treat God as an external being. He viewed God as an archetypal reality arising within the psyche. Christians insisted God is real and outside the mind. Jung saw evil as a psychological shadow. Christianity sees evil as as moral, spiritual, personal, Satan. Jung prioritized the self. Christianity prioritized God. Individuation versus salvation. Techniques in modern Christian therapy using Jungian concepts. Christian therapists using Jung often employs shadow work, identifying repressed behaviors, fears, and sinful tendencies, anger, pride, envy, helping clients acknowledge, accept, and transform these traits rather than denying them. Christian framing, understanding sin patterns and areas for repentance, but with psychological insights into why they arise. For example, a client struggles with anger. Instead of simply labeling it sinful, therapy examines its roots: childhood wounds, fear, unmet needs, and unconscious projections. Once conscious, it can be addressed spiritually through prayer, forgiveness, and practical self-discipline. Today, Christian therapy use Jung psychology a lot, and many of them don't even know the roots and the background of his spiritual beliefs. Now, part 4 or 5, I'm not sure at this point, but one of them in the last part is hypnosis, okay? How it all ties in. Why hypnosis was associated with the paranormal and the occult. Historically, hypnosis, or its precursors, was seen as a mysterious, otherworldly, and potentially dangerous for several reasons. 1. Ancient and medieval roots. Practices resembling hypnosis appear in shamanism, trance states induced for healing or spiritual insight. Ancient Egypt, sleep temples where patients entered dreamlike states for healing. In Greece, there were temples where sleep and suggestion were part of therapy. These states were interpreted as divine visions, spirit possessions, or magical influence, not psychology. And then 2, there's mesmerism and animal magnetism. Mesmer's ideas sounded paranormal. Invisible energy, trance, and force fields implied magical or mystical power. Critics saw this as occultism or charlatanry, while some devotees treated it like spiritual science. And then there's dramatic trance phenomena. Early hypnotic sessions often included body rigidity, amnesia, hallucinations or vivid visions, suggestibility. These behaviors resembled spirit possessions or magical transformation, which reinforced mystical interpretations. Associations with spiritual and occult movements. In 18th to 19th century, mesmerism influenced Freemasonry, spiritualism. Some believed trance states could access hidden knowledge, prophecy, or clairvoyance. This gave hypnosis a mystical, esoteric reputation rather than a scientific one. Today, hypnosis is understood as a psychological and neurological phenomenon, not paranormal. 1. Altered state of consciousness. Hypnosis is a state of focused attention, reduced peripheral awareness, increased suggestibility. Brain activity shows changes in attention, network, sensory processing, and self-awareness. Disassociation. The conscious mind steps back, allowing unconscious processes to influence behavior. Automatic responses to suggestions. Reduction of critical thinking or mental filtering. Suggestion-based change. Hypnosis works via verbal or nonverbal suggestions, reducing pain perception, modifying habits, accessing repressed memories with caution. Even today, hypnosis feels mysterious because 1, it puts you in a trance state, altered perception and memory. 2, people may experience hallucinations or suggestive behaviors. 3, the unconscious seems to act independently. And 4, stage hypnosis dramatizes the phenomena. Hypnosis was linked to the occult because early practitioners framed it in mystical, invisible, and spiritual terms. Mesmer's spiritual magnetic belief gave hypnosis a paranormal reputation. Modern hypnosis works through focused attention, disassociation, and suggestion, fully explained by neuroscience and psychology. Hypnosis continues to inspire curiosity because the mind in trance feels mysterious, echoing centuries of fascination with altered states. So hypnosis in Hollywood and the occult, the real historical connection.
Do you know how Hollywood hypnotizes you? Every time the lights fade and the screen begins to glow, your mind opens without resistance. Colors command emotion. Red fuels fear. Blue builds trust. Gold warms your soul, while hidden frequencies sync with your heartbeat, guiding every feeling. Each cut hides intention, every frame repeats ancient myths, and symbols speak a language your eyes see but your mind forgets. Behind the heroes, the idols, the perfect stories lies a quiet design, built to shape what you feel, what you love, and what you believe. You think you're just watching a movie, but maybe the movie is watching you.
Hollywood has been obsessed with trance states, altered consciousness, mind control, esoteric symbolism, psychological manipulation, occult ritual themes. This is because hypnosis is cinematic. It evokes mystery, vulnerability, seduction, power, transformation. And the occult is inherently symbolic, theatrical, and visual, perfect for the screen. Early Hollywood borrowed heavily from stage hypnotists, spiritualists, seances, Freudian psychoanalysis, Jungian symbolism, Mesmer's magnetism, occult organizations, Golden Dawn, theosophy. This shaped genres like film noir, psychological thrillers, horror, surrealism. David Lynch, Hitchcock. Do movies act like hypnosis? Yes. Movies absolutely can create a hypnotic trance state. Movies create a disassociated attention state. This is almost the same neurological mechanism as hypnosis. 1. Your focus narrows to the screen. 2. Peripheral awareness fades. 3. Time perception distorts. 4. Emotional suggestibility increases. 5. Imagery becomes vivid. 6. Critical thinking partially reduces. 7. You absorb story plus emotion more deeply. Basically, movies hack the brain's natural storytelling trance. This is why we cry at fictional events. We jump during jump scares. We lose track of time. Kids believe in fictional worlds. We feel changed after certain films. This is psychological entertainment. Do directors intentionally use hypnotic techniques? Of course they do. It guides emotion, creates immersion, influence interpretation, shape experience, evoke symbolism, alter consciousness. How films induce trance, psychological and neurological. Movies use techniques that mirror hypnotic induction. 1. Dark room, right? When you're in a movie theater, sensory narrowing, your world becomes the screen. 2. Flicker rate of film television. Visual flickers around 24 to 60 hertz naturally entrains brainwaves. And 3. Predictable narrative structure. Your brain relaxes into the rhythm of storytelling. 4. Emotional suggestion through music. Music bypasses rational processing and influences the limbic system. 5. Visual symbolism. Archetypes bypass logic and speak directly to the unconscious. 6. Disassociation. Viewers temporarily forget themselves, entering the story world. This is why films feel magical, dreamlike, or trance-inducing. It's guided attention. Why people thought movies were occult or hypnotic. In the early 20th century, some believed cinema projectors emitted hypnotic rays. Flickers created mind control. Directors inserted subconscious suggestions. Hollywood elites used occult rituals in filmmaking. Can movies control us? Of course they do, by stealing your free will, implanting commands, hypnotic dominations. They can influence your mood, opinions, worldview, desires, empathy, fears, and values. Cinema influences emotions and thoughts. Occult imagery is common in symbolic form. Trance states resemble hypnosis psychologically. And this is how film editing mimics hypnotic induction. Hypnotic induction is a process used to guide someone into a trance. Filmmakers rediscovered many of these techniques because they naturally create immersion, surrender, and emotional openness. The hypnotist asks you to focus on a point, relax, peripheral awareness, let the world fade. In editing and cinema, it does the same thing. Dark theater, bright screen, tight close-ups, slow zooms, vigneted lighting. Your entire visual field literally shrinks to the film. This is the beginning of a trance. Hypnosis, repetition reduces critical thinking. Repeated phrases, steady rhythm, looping instructions. And in cinema, directors use repetitive shots, looping sound motifs, rhythmic cutting, repeated dialogue. The brain relaxes into pattern, becoming more suggestible. Hypnosis. Trance is basically controlled disassociation. You detach from normal awareness. Time distorts, imagination takes precedence. In cinema and editing, intentionally creates disassociation via montage, dream sequence, jump cuts, surreal transitions, POV shifts. You leave yourself and merge with the film's reality. And in their shock and submit technique, used in certain hypnotherapy approaches. In hypnosis, a sudden disruption can deepen trance, loud noise, command, sudden gesture. And in cinema, horror, and thrillers use jump cuts, startling transitions, abrupt silence, loud sound, sudden camera angles, and hypnotist guides imagery. Imagine a staircase descending deeper. And in film, visual storytelling does it for you. Symbolic imagery, archetypal scenes, mythic metaphors. Your mind believes the imagery almost as if it's real. In film, editing manipulates what you see, what you don't see, how long you see it, what you feel. The audience surrenders to the filmmaker's decisions. And then there's 8, emotional suggestibility. Films place you into heightened emotional states, suggestibility. This is why sad scenes hit hard. Scary scenes stay with you. Romantic scenes feel intoxicating. You're in a guided emotional trance. In short, film is the only art form that uses controlled images, controlled sound, controlled time, controlled rhythm, controlled focus. That's basically hypnosis with cinematography. Cinema is uniquely suited for ritual because it is ritual. It uses repetition, symbols, transformation, darkness, light, mask, and rhythm. There's actual occult rituals depicted in cinema. All rituals fall into 4 major Jungian categories. The shadow ritual. So horror films equals shadow confrontation, summoning demons, summoning the repressed self. For those who love horror films, right? Why cinema loves occult rituals? Because film is ritual. Watching in darkness, surrender of consciousness, symbolic imagery, rhythmic editing, like chanting, trance state immersion. And why occult symbolism feels so powerful on screen? Because Carl Jung archetypes live in the collective unconscious. Occult symbols tap into the universal psyche structure. When a film uses them, we feel something ancient, primal, psychological. It bypasses intellect and goes straight into the unconscious. As Jung would say, cinema is the new myth-making machine of the modern world, and occult cinema is a place where the archetypes speak openly, end quote. Whew, this was a heavy video, and I thank you if you watched until the very end, and I know there will be a lot of thoughts in the comments. I'm going to remain unbiased, but as I said before, anything you watch, anything you allow into your brain, be very aware that is it your choice or are the choices being made for you? Are they being made for you? And I believe in honesty and openness, and the fact that Hollywood is shrouded in so much secrecy, and they're not just being open about it. Why not? Anything, if you want people to decide for themselves and they really have free will, then be open about it. Speak the truth and let people decide for themselves. But it's shrouded in secrecy because people hide what they're not proud of. Remember that. People hide what they're not proud of. If you are proud of something, there's no need to hide it. And if you are living in truth, there's no need to be secret about the truth. We are secret often of what we are not proud of, right? Right. I'm going to give a quick break on how you could support this channel and this type of content as we delve a little deeper. I obviously am straying away from more of the bubblegum type of content and going a little bit deeper with you guys. But as I stated, it does come with a lot. So your support means a lot. Thank you for being here. I love you. As you guys have noticed that as we are doing these breakdowns and I'm redoing a lot of the older videos that I did and going a little bit deeper into topics that may not be too YouTube friendly or industry friendly, there's a lot of things behind the scene. Like my Queen Elizabeth video got demonetized, my Jane Mansfield video, all of these videos are steady getting demonetized by YouTube, and it's a lot of fight behind the scenes. So I do want to continue to push out these type of videos and go deeper and not really feel too limited. I don't want to really do a Patreon or put it behind a paywall simply because I want everyone to kind of have access to this. So I will be working on a website coming up soon. I want to leave the opportunity for those that want to support generously monetarily so that I can not worry about like videos getting demonetized. It would help to push out this type of content unfiltered and not really worry about what really is going on behind the scenes. YouTube with super thanks give creators like myself a lot of trouble with super thanks. Sometimes we just don't receive them. Though I see people sending them, we just don't receive them. So this is why I encourage those that want to send through Cashapp or PayPal. Thank you very much. And I appreciate it. And of course, we'll have more of this content coming up and a lot of videos, older videos that you guys see, I will be redoing and going a lot more deeper into them, like the Maryland video. And if you guys enjoy this type of content, leave a white heart in the comments so that I know, hey, Karine, keep them coming, because there will always be a lot of backlash in the comments as well. Okay. I love you guys so much. Thank you for staying this long. And if you really support this type of content, again, contribution is very helpful. Until next time.